Hi my angels, it's Hailey Reese and happy December 1st. I hope that you guys are having an absolutely fantastic morning, afternoon, or night, whatever it is for you when this video finally reaches you. Welcome back to Reese Miss, you guys. If you guys are new to my channel, I am uploading every single day this month, not only on this channel, but also on my vlog channel. So if you guys enjoy my content, make sure you subscribe or turn on your post notifications and join the fam, because I have some really exciting content planned for this month. This year's been kind of crazy. I mean, it's been crazy for all of us, but for myself especially, and I know that my struggles kind of reflected in my content, and I'm finally just feeling so excited to create content that I think you guys are gonna be so excited about. I've read all of your critiques, all of your comments, all of your suggestions, and this is gonna be a wild ride of a month. So I hope that you guys are excited and you know how much I love and appreciate you. And today's video is one that I've been wanting to dive into since I first researched it last spring. I actually wanted to talk about it early last year, but I never wound up getting around to it because this case has so many components to it, and it is truly an unsolved mystery. Like, nobody knows the truth behind this case, and that is the murder mystery of room 1046. So without further ado, let's just dive right on into this case, because this is probably going to be a lengthy video. As I said, this is not one of those typical mysteries or murder mysteries where everybody kind of has the same idea of what could have happened. This case is kind of all over the place, and just when you think it can't get crazier, it most certainly does. So make sure that you guys let me know as you go through this video, as we're going through this case, what your theories are, and then let me know at the end of the video what your final thought or theory is, because we're going to discuss the case itself and then a couple of the different popular theories. But I would love to hear what you guys have to say. So with all that being said, let's get into the murder mystery of room 1046. So on Wednesday, January 2nd, 1935, at around 1:20 p.m., a young man checked into the Hotel President in Kansas City under the name Roland Owen. He was said to be from Los Angeles and between the age of 20 to 30, with brown hair, a scar on his head, and a cauliflower ear, which is a common boxing injury. He was dressed nicely and checked in for 3 days. But the kicker was, he had absolutely no luggage, which I know that men can be different than women, but for me to check in anywhere for even a night without a ridiculous amount of luggage is just unheard of. So the bellboy named Randolph helped him to his room 1046. Now, Roland was said to often complain about the prices of the hotel right next door to the one that he was staying in, enough so that people were taking note of the fact that he was complaining about that hotel, which is kind of a random fact right now, but just keep that in mind for later on in this video. So he checks in, he gets situated, and the next day, the maid named Mary Soptic goes in to clean his room. Now, she noticed that he was laying on top of the bed, fully clothed, but the scene was a little bit strange. All of the curtains were shut. The room was only lit by a single light, like a lamp in the corner, and he seemed very anxious. He told Mary to leave the door unlocked when she left because he was expecting somebody soon, but something about his energy seemed off to her. At around 4 p.m., Mary would return to the room 1046 with fresh towels, as she'd taken the ones that were dirty. At this point, when she entered the room, she saw Roland laying on top of the made bed, completely clothed, sound asleep, but she did take note of a note in his room. On his bedside table, she found a note that read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The next morning at 10:30 a.m., Mary went to go to once again clean the room, but noticed that this time it was locked from the outside. So she assumed that Roland had left and locked the door from the outside, but when she entered, she found him inside and realized that somebody else had locked the door from the outside. Even stranger, when she went back in the room, Roland was still in the room in basically the exact same position, which this case gets very strange, but I can only assume what Mary might have been thinking at this point. Every single day, this guy who brought no luggage with him is just laying on the bed in the same position. But now she knows that somebody else must have been there because the door was locked from the outside instead of the inside. But anyways, let's continue. While Mary was in the room cleaning, Dawn would actually take a phone call and say, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast. No, I am not hungry." So again, as she had the day before, Mary returned at 4 p.m. with fresh towels because she'd taken the dirty towels that morning. However, this time when she knocked, she heard two voices in the room rather than just the voice of Roland. When she announced that she had fresh towels, a loud, deep voice that was not Roland's told her to leave and that they did not need fresh towels, which she knew was a lie because she'd taken all of the good towels that morning. There were no towels in the room. She wanted to bring them fresh ones, but she decided that this was clearly a heated conversation or a conversation that she should not intrude on, so she decided it was best to just leave. So here's where things get a little crazy outside of the hotel. At around 11 p.m. that same night, a man named Robert Lane offered a ride to a young man walking up 13th Street, which is supposedly about 1.5 miles away from the hotel itself where Roland had been staying. Now, this man wasn't wearing very much clothing and did not have a jacket. He was not dressed for the night, and he had what appeared to be a very deep gash in his arm. Now, as I'm sure you could assume, that man would later identify him as Roland T. Owen and claimed that by the way he was acting and his body language, it seemed as though his gash on his arm wasn't his only injury. It was like he was trying to hide a much worse injury. The young man, who he said was Roland, later on asked to be dropped off somewhere that he could get a taxi. Actually, I read on a few different accounts that he approached the car because he thought that it was a taxi, but when he realized it wasn't, he asked for a ride somewhere where he could get a taxi. When Robert inquired about his arm, he basically mumbled that he will kill him tomorrow. But in the end, he hopped out when they reached the taxi stand, and that was the last time that Robert would see this young man. However, I did hear that the police rejected that said statement just because they believed that somebody would have noticed him returning to the hotel if he had wounds of that nature. Somebody would have seen him or noticed if that had been the case. It's also important to note that witnesses did report later on having seen Roland at a bar or several bars on 12th Street with two particular women on that same night. But supposedly at that time, he actually was wearing a coat, which he wasn't when he was asking for a ride. So where, when, or why he obtained that slash mark, nobody really knows. Now, another thing important to note is on that same evening, a commercial-looking woman entered the hotel and was frantically searching different floors, and the 10th floor in particular, looking for a man that she never found and would actually just wind up leaving the hotel. I'm sure you know what commercial women were back then. Whether or not she was, that was how she was described. Now, it's said that she was looking for a man in 1026 that she never found, but there's plenty of people who have thought perhaps she was looking for a man in 1046 instead of 1026. But again, it's one of those things that we'll never know. And another thing to think about from that night is that that same night, a woman named Jean Owen, who was staying in room 1048, complained about a man and a woman fighting in a room nearby. However, there was a party taking place at room 1055, so she never filed a formal complaint to the front desk because she assumed it could be associated to the party. So here's where things get especially strange, especially keeping all the different things that happened that night prior into consideration. The next morning, the bellhop named Randolph received a phone call from the hotel's operator. They were basically saying that the phone in room 1046 had been off the hook without anybody using it, and were requesting that he resolve the problem and get the phone back on the hook. So he went upstairs to check on Roland and then realized that the door was locked with a do not disturb sign on the door. He knocked on the door and Roland told him to come in and turn on the lights. However, when he explained that the door was locked, there was never another response. So he basically assumed that he was probably drunk inside the room, and that was the case. So he yelled out to him to put the phone back on the hook and then proceeded back to his duty. But then an hour and a half later, the telephone operator would call back again, speaking to another bellhop named Harold Pike, saying, hey, listen, the phone is still off the hook in room 1046. Can we resolve this? They basically explained that they'd spoken earlier to another bellhop, but it still was off the hook with nobody on it, and could they figure that out? This time, though, he decided to actually let himself into the room utilizing the master key. And that's when he said he saw on the bed what looked to be an intoxicated man. And he figured that what had happened is that he'd knocked the phone off the hook and was just kind of too drunk to deal with the situation. So he took it upon himself to pick up the phone, put it back on the hook, and then would just report what had happened to his manager. It's also important to note that he was laying naked on the bed and was said to be intoxicated from his interpretation of it. But as I should mention, whenever they would go into his room, he would have the curtains drawn and the room was very, very dimly lit. So he didn't want to look too much. He just put the phone back on the hook and left the room, which could you imagine nowadays? Somebody's just like, your phone's off the hook. I'm coming in your hotel room. Sorry, you're naked and drunk on the bed. Let me just pop that back on and leave you to be. Like, I can't picture that, but these were very clearly very different times. At 10:30 a.m., the phone was now back off the hook again. Randolph was sent back to the room, and Randolph said, and I quote, when I entered the room, this man was within 2 feet of the door on his knees and elbows, holding his head in his hands. I noticed blood on his head. I then turned the light on. I looked around and saw blood on the wall, on the bed, and in the bathroom. This frightened me, and I immediately left the room and went downstairs. Roland was discovered with extensive and brutal injuries, you guys, that I'm not going to go totally into detail because that's not what this channel is per se, but he had sustained some traumatic injuries. It almost appeared that he'd been tortured. He'd been struck on the head repeatedly, which resulted in a fractured skull. He was stabbed in the chest, which resulted in a punctured lung. He had bruising on his neck from being strangled with a cord. And it's important to note that he'd been tied up with a cord around his neck, wrists, and ankles. But remarkably, he was still alive when they found him. When they asked him who was in the room and tried to pry at him as to what had happened, he told them that he had fallen against the bathtub and that nobody had been in the room. He then fell unconscious and was taken to the hospital where he would later pass away. Now, according to the doctors, his injuries were sustained around 6 to 7 hours prior to his arrival. Now, here's where this gets really strange because the unfortunate thing is horrible things happen all the time. What makes this case so crazy is the details that would follow after such a horrific event. Where it gets even stranger is that the police began investigating the hotel room, looking for any leads as to what on earth could have happened in there. There were no clothes in the room at all, not even any that matched the description that he had showed up at the hotel in to begin with. So think about it. This guy, this young man shows up at a hotel with no luggage, and then when this traumatic event happens and they search his room, his initial clothes weren't even in there. There was whatever had been the murder weapon was nowhere in sight, and there was absolutely no evidence. Found a necktie label, an unlit cigarette, a hairpin, a safety pin, and a small unopened diluted bottle of sulfuric acid. And a broken water glass with a jagged edge was in the sink. But other than that, there wasn't much to go off of. The only prints that they were able to pull from the room were on the telephone stand, and the police thought that they were that of a woman. However, they were never able to identify who that woman was. Furthermore, detectives would find out that Roland T. Owen never existed. There was no record of any such man having lived in the United States, so they basically went to the public to find anything that they could on this particular man. Shortly thereafter, they found out that that neighboring hotel that he'd been complaining about knew who he was. They came forward saying a man that matched that exact description had stayed in their hotel on January 1st, but with a totally different name. He checked in under the name Eugene K. Scott. Much like Roland, no man by the name of Eugene K. Scott ever existed. Over the coming months, many people would identify as the body of a loved one, although when further investigations were taken into place, none of those leads went anywhere, and none of those identifications stuck. Finally, the case would run so cold that the detectives would decide it was time to actually go ahead and bury the body. But here's where it gets even stranger, you guys. On March 3rd, the Kansas City Journal-Post claimed that Roland was to be buried in a potter's field. However, they would then receive an anonymous phone call claiming that they would provide the money needed to give him a proper funeral. On March 23rd, 1935, the promised money would be delivered. It was sent in a newspaper to the funeral home from an anonymous sender with a card that read, "Love forever, Louise." But here's where it gets even stranger. I hope you guys are keeping up because this case has a million different things, and when I was researching it, I was having trouble keeping up with all the different leads. But here's where it gets even stranger, you guys. In 1936, a woman named Ruby Ogletree read about the case in the paper and identified the sketch as her 17-year-old son, revealing his true identity. His real name, Artemis Ogletree. And he was not 20 to 30 years old. He was 17 years old. But even eerier, she'd been receiving letters from her son after his passing. She had been receiving letters from her son that were handwritten prior to that, but what she found strange about those letters was that they were typed, and her son didn't know how to type. She then revealed that he'd first went missing when he was staying with another man in Kansas City, and that she'd received a phone call from a man named Jordan claiming that Artemis saved his life and that he decided to marry a woman in Cairo, Egypt, and that the only reason that he couldn't write hand letters anymore was because he'd lost his thumb in a brawl. During that time, she had grown increasingly suspicious and contacted any authorities she could, including Egyptian authorities, but nobody was able to locate Artemis. In the early 2000s, Dr. John Horner, who published a detailed account of the murder case, received a phone call about Artemis Ogletree. The caller claimed to have found a box of newspaper clips about the case with a deceased elderly person's belongings, but no more information was given. The case has since ran completely cold. The hotel president still functions today. However, they've gone under a name change and renovations to disconnect from that gruesome past and what occurred in room 1046. Although I have to be honest with you guys, I would love to visit the hotel. But even though the case ran cold in every direction it could have, there are a couple of different theories as to what could have occurred that night. The first being that Dawn beat Artemis in the room 1046 and acted completely alone. Some people think that maybe they had some sort of a relationship with one another that went down south, or that there was some sort of a love triangle. But the first theory is basically just that Dawn acted alone in killing Artemis. Another theory is that it was some sort of a mob hit, given the fact that he'd been missing for a while and nobody really knew where he was. He was clearly going under different names and aliases, and didn't carry a lot of things with him. He also acted very strange in his room with the curtains drawn and kind of just laying there with one lamp on. So some people think maybe the mob was after him and that's what wound up happening. Another theory is that he was killed for being unfaithful to his fiance or his partner. A flower shop was said to have gotten a call saying, 13 American Beauty roses sent to Roland Owen's funeral. I'm doing this for my sister. Leaving many to think, could he have been killed by a brother whom he was unfaithful to their sister? Or was he killed for being unfaithful? There were several different accounts of people saying that cheaters get what they deserve, etc. in relation to this case. So some people think that maybe he cheated, or maybe he was having an affair with a male and that's what happened. While others say that that commercial woman who was looking for a man that night on the floors could have some involvement in his murder. But as I said, nobody will ever know what truly happened in room 1046. But I want to know what you guys think of this, because this is one of those cases that I could talk about with my friends all day long because I have no idea what happened. It's all so strange to me from start to finish. The entire case is just... It's crazy because one second you think you have it figured out what could have happened, and the next second none of it really makes sense. So as I said at the beginning of the video, please let me know in the comments below what you guys think of this particular case. And that is it for today's video. I am so excited for this month, you guys, because I have so many big cases planned and content that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. But if there are any cases that you would like to see from me this month, maybe if there's any Christmas related cases, let me know in the comments below. And that is it for today's video. If you guys are new to my channel or you are just not yet subscribed but you do enjoy my videos, I would really love and appreciate it if you would go ahead and click that subscribe button, and please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Happy first day of Reesemas, you guys. I'm so thankful for you guys, and even though this year has been rough, you guys have been my saving grace, so thank you for sticking by me through some of my darkest times, and I'm excited for what the future holds. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness, and until next time, I love you.